Jim Jones, a well-known hip-hop artist, member of Dipset, and respected figure in the music industry, has found himself in serious legal trouble. A massive FBI sting operation has uncovered shocking details that have sent ripples through the hip-hop world. Leaked court documents, wiretapped phone calls, and secret recordings have all played a role in exposing a deeper story. It turns out that Jim Jones had been under surveillance for a long time, and now the truth is finally coming out. But what exactly did the authorities discover? How did he end up in this situation? And what does it mean for his future? Stick around because we're going to break down all the key details, the evidence that has surfaced, and what could happen next in his career. Jim Jones has been in the rap game for years, making a name for himself as part of the legendary group, the Diplomats, also known as Dipset. He's responsible for hits like We Fly High, a song that became an anthem in the mid-2000s. Over time, his music career has had its ups and downs, but one thing has remained consistent: his street connections. People have long speculated about his ties to organized crime, gang-related activities, and questionable business dealings. However, until now, these were mostly rumors and speculation. The latest FBI investigation has changed everything, turning whispers into serious allegations. According to reports, the FBI had been keeping an eye on Jim Jones for months, possibly even years. The information they gathered was enough to place him at the center of a large-scale federal investigation. But how did this all start? Well, it appears that an informant played a major role in exposing crucial details to law enforcement. Someone, with inside knowledge of both the streets and the music industry, started feeding information to the authorities. This person allegedly provided the FBI with details about secret meetings, financial transactions, and even direct conversations involving Jim Jones. Once the feds had enough leads, they did what they do best. They started listening. Wiretaps were placed on specific individuals connected to the case, and through recorded phone calls and messages, law enforcement reportedly uncovered more than they had anticipated. Jim Jones, thinking his private conversations were safe, had no idea that law enforcement was monitoring everything. But what exactly did these recordings reveal? That's where things take an even more serious turn. In the world of federal investigations, once the feds start listening, people tend to get caught. In Jim Jones's case, it appears that the wiretaps revealed conversations that raised several red flags. The government doesn't just put someone under surveillance for no reason. They have to present enough evidence to a judge to justify monitoring someone's communications. Once that approval is granted, every phone call, text message, or voice memo can be collected and used as evidence. This isn't the first time Jim Jones's name has been connected to wiretapped conversations. Back in 2019, his name surfaced in a leaked phone call involving Tekashi 6699's former associates. In that conversation, they discussed potential violence, street retaliation, and keeping certain people in line. That call alone raised a lot of questions, but Jim Jones managed to avoid serious legal consequences at the time. Fast forward to today, and it looks like his name has come up once again in another major investigation. Sources claim that in this new case, the FBI wiretaps captured private conversations between Jim Jones and individuals with known criminal connections. These discussions allegedly involved financial transactions, coded language that investigators believe referred to illegal activities, and even strategic planning on how to handle certain matters. But was Jim Jones just a bystander in these conversations? Or was he actively giving instructions? This is where things start to get complicated. Some reports suggest that Jim Jones wasn't just a passive participant, he was allegedly giving orders. Law enforcement believes that the recorded conversations show him discussing plans, financial movements, and even ways to avoid law enforcement detection. If true, this would mean the feds have evidence linking him directly to potential criminal activities. However, there's always the issue of interpretation. When people use coded language, it can sometimes be unclear whether they're discussing illegal actions or just speaking vaguely. Defense lawyers often argue that unless the prosecution can prove beyond a doubt that certain words refer to crimes, the case might not hold up in court. But the FBI doesn't usually make arrests unless they believe they have a solid case. If they have decided to move forward against Jim Jones, it likely means they have collected enough evidence over a long period. And this isn't just about a few phone calls. There are rumors that the FBI has been gathering wiretapped conversations for months or even years. If this turns out to be true, it could make it incredibly difficult for Jim Jones to defend himself. But what happens next? Is this the beginning of the end for his career? The next revelations could be even more shocking. One important thing to remember about the federal government is that they don't move unless they're confident in their case. The FBI and federal prosecutors have an extremely high conviction rate, around 90%, because they don't charge someone unless they believe they can win. So how did they build their case against Jim Jones? It didn't happen overnight. One of the first steps in federal investigations is following the money. Financial records are often one of the biggest indicators of illegal activity. In past cases involving rappers, politicians, and businessmen, sudden unexplained wealth has raised suspicions. When someone's financial situation doesn't align with their known sources of income, the government starts looking into it. Jim Jones has been in the rap industry for a long time, but his recent music hasn't been topping the charts the way it once did. Despite this, he has continued to live an extravagant lifestyle, buying expensive jewelry, driving luxury cars, and maintaining a level of wealth that has caught the attention of authorities. If the feds have been watching his financial movements, they might have found transactions that don't make sense or appear to be linked to illegal activities. So what does all of this mean for Jim Jones? If the allegations are true, he could be facing some serious charges. Federal cases often come with long prison sentences, and because the government typically gathers overwhelming evidence before making an arrest, fighting these charges won't be easy. However, it's important to note that Jim Jones has not been convicted of anything yet. His legal team will likely fight these accusations aggressively, trying to discredit the evidence and challenge the validity of the wiretaps. Federal agents started tracking financial transactions linked to Jim Jones and his associates, and they found something unusual. This wasn't just about regular bank transfers. Large amounts of money were moving through different accounts, offshore businesses, and even fake companies. According to leaked reports, authorities believe some of these transactions were designed to hide where the money really came from. When the feds suspect money laundering, things can go downhill quickly. One of the strongest tools the government has is getting someone to talk. The feds love turning people against each other, and in this case, it looks like someone close to Jim Jones may have been working with them. Think about it. When the FBI runs an investigation, they don't just rely on wiretaps and surveillance. They often get inside help from people who either want to save themselves from legal trouble or have their own reasons for bringing someone down. So the question is, who flipped? We've seen this happen before. Tekashi 6699 testified against his entire crew, leading to multiple arrests. In other cases, key figures have cooperated with authorities to get reduced sentences. Rumors suggest that someone who was once close to Jim Jones, someone with deep ties to the streets, might have been feeding information to the feds for a long time. If that's true, it could explain how law enforcement built such a strong case. Once the shady feds have an informant inside, they don't stop. They keep digging, making connections, and gathering more evidence until they're ready to make an arrest. Right now, the big question is, what charges is Jim Jones actually facing? We don't have the official indictment yet, but sources say he could be looking at serious federal charges. One possibility is a RICO charge, which is used against organized crime groups. If prosecutors can prove that Jim Jones was part of a criminal organization, he could be facing a long prison sentence. Another likely charge is money laundering. If those suspicious financial transactions are tied to illegal activity, it could mean federal charges. Even if Jim Jones wasn't directly committing crimes, he could still be held responsible if he helped facilitate illegal actions. On top of that, if he tried to cover up evidence or warn others about the investigation, he could be charged with obstruction of justice. The most dangerous thing about a RICO case is that prosecutors don't need to prove that Jim Jones personally committed crimes. They just have to show that he was connected to an organization that did, and that alone could put him behind bars for years. So, what happens next? His legal team is scrambling to figure out the best move. Will he fight the charges in court, or will he take a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence? One thing is certain, this isn't just another celebrity scandal. This case could be the biggest legal battle of Jim Jones's life. But the bigger question is he actually guilty, or is he being targeted by the system? This leads to another discussion. Does the federal government specifically target rappers? History suggests that the hip-hop industry has been under heavy surveillance for years. Many rappers have been investigated, arrested, or convicted, not just for crimes they committed, but also because of the people they associated with. Tupac Shakur was constantly harassed by law enforcement, and many believed the police were out to take him down. Snoop Dogg once faced murder charges despite having little involvement in the crime. Meek Mill spent years fighting a legal battle that seemed more about controlling him than about justice. More recently, rappers like YFN Lucci, Young Thug, and Gunna have been caught up in RICO cases, showing that law enforcement is cracking down on the hip-hop industry harder than ever. Now Jim Jones, a rapper with decades in the game, suddenly finds himself in the middle of a federal investigation. But why now? Some people think his legal troubles might not just be about criminal activity. There's a theory that powerful figures in the music industry don't want certain artists to have too much influence. Hip-hop isn't just about music anymore. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that impacts politics, social movements, and business deals. Some argue that when a black artist gains too much power, the system finds a way to bring them down. Jim Jones is more than just a rapper. He's a businessman, an executive, and a respected figure in the culture. Could his arrest be part of a bigger plan to remove him from power? Or is this really a case where the evidence was too strong for the feds to ignore? If Jim Jones plans to fight the charges, he's going to need an elite legal team. Federal cases are extremely hard to win. Over 90% of federal prosecutions end in conviction. When the government goes after someone, they usually spend years building a case. So what are Jim Jones's options? One choice is to fight the charges in court. If he truly believes he's innocent, he can take the case to trial and challenge the evidence. His lawyers would need to cross-examine government witnesses, who could include informants and former associates. They would also question whether the wiretaps used in the case were obtained legally. Was there enough evidence for the FBI to get a warrant? Were Jim Jones's conversations taken out of context? Just because someone talks about something illegal doesn't mean they actually committed a crime, but taking the case to trial is a huge risk. If he loses, he could be facing decades in prison. His second option is to take a plea deal. Most federal cases never go to trial because defendants often take plea deals to avoid harsher sentences. If prosecutors offer Jim Jones a deal, he might agree to a lesser sentence in exchange for pleading guilty. He could also cooperate with authorities to reduce his prison time. In some cases, this could mean avoiding a long-term sentence by negotiating a lower charge. However, taking a plea deal has serious consequences. It would mean admitting guilt, which could damage his career and reputation permanently. A big question is how the hip-hop community will react. Over the years, we've seen different responses when artists get into legal trouble. When Meek Mill was arrested, major figures like Jay-Z and Drake, along with big corporations, supported him and helped him get released. But when Tekashi 6ix9ine was arrested and chose to cooperate with the government, the hip-hop world turned against him. When Young Thug and Gunna were charged, they received support, but there was also controversy over the use of rap lyrics as evidence in court. Jim Jones has been in the industry for decades and has earned respect, but will the industry stand by him now? Or will people distance themselves to avoid being connected to his case? His future is uncertain, and everything depends on the strength of the evidence against him. If the FBI really has years of wiretaps and financial records, this could be a difficult case to fight. His legal team will need to challenge the government's case and find weaknesses in the prosecution's arguments. If they can do that successfully, he might have a chance at beating the charges. Another major factor will be public and industry support. Will his fans and fellow artists stand by him, or will he be left to face this situation alone? One thing is certain: this situation is far from over. The case isn't just about Jim Jones. It also raises questions about the hip-hop industry, the justice system, and the power structure in place. Will he be able to clear his name, or is this the end of his career and his freedom? Only time will tell, but this story is just beginning. One of the biggest mysteries in this case is what exactly the FBI has on tape. According to federal sources, Jim Jones was allegedly recorded discussing illegal activities, financial transactions, and possibly even more damaging conversations. But wiretap evidence isn't easy to get. Law enforcement can't just tap someone's phone for no reason. To do so, they need to convince a judge that the person is involved in serious criminal activity. This means they likely had strong evidence, even before they started recording his calls. So, what exactly did Jim Jones say on these tapes that led to his arrest? Federal agents don't wiretap someone randomly. There is a legal process behind it. First, they need probable cause, meaning they must have strong enough evidence to convince a judge that a wiretap is necessary. Then, they need judicial approval, where a judge has to sign off on the request after reviewing the evidence. Lastly, there's continuous monitoring, where agents actively listen to calls and keep records of important conversations. If Jim Jones was wiretapped, the government must believe he was part of an ongoing criminal operation. Reports suggest that he wasn't just a bystander in these calls. Some leaked information claims he was discussing financial transactions tied to illegal activities. Others say he was in communication with people already under federal surveillance. Some even speculate that the tapes contain violent conversations or discussions of criminal plans. However, just because someone talks about something illegal doesn't mean they actually committed a crime. Context is everything. Hip-hop culture often uses slang and coded language that outsiders might misinterpret. For example, saying, "We have to handle that situation," could mean anything from fixing a personal issue to something more serious. Talking about moving weight might sound like a drug deal, but could also refer to business transactions. Saying "take care of someone" could mean helping them out, not necessarily harming them. This isn't the first time Jim Jones has been linked to wiretaps. During Tekashi 6ix9ine's trial in 2019, Jim Jones's name came up in court when a wiretap recording of him surfaced. In that recording, he allegedly called 6ix9ine a snitch and spoke about super violating him. Many believe this was a call for violence against 6ix9ine, but Jim Jones was never charged for that conversation. This raises an interesting point. Could the feds have been monitoring Jim Jones ever since then? If he was already on their radar, it's possible they've been collecting evidence on him for years. If they suspected criminal involvement back then, they might have waited until they had enough proof to make an arrest. If they already had wiretap recordings from the past, they could be using those to strengthen their current case. This leads to another question. Is Jim Jones being targeted because of his past associations, or was he really involved in illegal activities? Another factor to consider is whether someone inside his circle is working with the feds. In many major cases, law enforcement relies on an informant, someone who flips and provides inside information. We've seen this happen before. Tekashi 6ix9ine turned informant and helped put members of his former crew behind bars. Alpo Martinez was a well-known informant who took down major drug lords. Sammy the Bull Gravano helped bring down the Gambino crime family. Could someone close to Jim Jones be working with authorities? It's possible. The FBI may have had someone recording conversations from the inside. A former associate could have agreed to cooperate to reduce their own sentence. Someone in his circle may have been pressured into giving up information to avoid facing charges themselves. If there is an informant in this case, the government might have evidence that hasn't been made public yet. Even though wiretap evidence is powerful, it doesn't guarantee a conviction. Jim Jones's legal team has several possible defenses. First, they can challenge the legality of the wiretap. If they can prove that the wiretap was obtained improperly, the evidence could be thrown out. They might argue that there wasn't enough probable cause, that the government didn't follow proper procedures, or that there was an issue with the warrant. If any mistakes were made, his lawyers could push to have the recordings excluded. Another defense is arguing that the conversations were misinterpreted. As mentioned earlier, hip-hop culture uses language that outsiders may not understand. If his legal team can show that his words were taken out of context and weren't direct proof of criminal activity, it could weaken the case against him. They may argue that slang terms were misunderstood, that parts of the recordings were edited, or that Jim Jones was simply talking but not actually involved in any crimes. If the government's case is too strong, Jim Jones might have to consider taking a plea deal. If convicted, he could face a long prison sentence. A plea deal could result in less time behind bars in exchange for pleading guilty. He could also get probation or house arrest instead of federal prison. Taking a deal would also mean avoiding a lengthy, expensive trial that might not go in his favor. However, accepting a plea deal could also destroy his reputation. If he cooperates with authorities, he might be seen as a snitch, which has serious consequences in hip-hop culture. Some artists never recover from that kind of label. If he fights the case and wins, he could clear his name. But if he loses, he could spend years in prison. Right now, Jim Jones is in the biggest fight of his life. His future depends on how strong the evidence is, how well his legal team defends him, and whether the industry and public continue to support him. This situation is far from over, and there are still many unanswered questions. Will he beat the charges and walk free, or is this the end of his career? Only time will tell.